everybody. Welcome to Willamette. So good to see you on this Sunday. Would you join us as we stand and sing? I was buried beneath my shame. Who could carry that kind of weight? It was my turn till I met. Let's put our hands together, come on. I was breathing but not alive. All my failures I tried to hide. It was my turn till I met you. Every voice, you called my name, and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness, into your glorious day. You called my name, and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness, into your glorious day. Save my soul. We sing of freedom, come on. And now your freedom is all that I know. Oh, the old made new. Jesus, when I met you, when you called my name, and I ran out of that grave, to your glorious day. You called my name, and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness, to your glorious day. Let's all join in together this morning to make it loud. I needed rescue. I needed rescue. My sin was heavy, but chains break at the weight of your glory. I needed shelter. Come on. Now you call me a citizen of heaven. When I was broken, you were my healing. Now you're lift up the name of Jesus. Let's go, man.
Well, again, we are so excited that you've decided to join us this morning at Willamette. Welcome to church. This morning, we get to sing a new song together, and the heart of this song comes out of Jeremiah 29:11, where it says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." And simply put, this is a song about trusting in God's promises. His promises never to leave us, never to forsake us, to rescue and deliver us out of darkness and evil. His promise promised to be with us until the end of the age, his faithfulness to us as his children. And this song is so powerful because we get to join together as a church family, regardless of the weekend we've had, regardless of the month, the year, the season that we find ourselves in, and we get to come together, all of our doubts, all of our fears, all of our frustrations, and choose together to praise our faithful and good and perfect Father. And we get to say, God, we as a church family, we trust your word is true. Your promises for us are good. So will you join with me as we sing in this new chorus together? Let's sing this together. For I know your thoughts, your plans for me are good, and I know you hold my future and my hope. Your promises never fail. Your promises never fail. Your promises never fail. Your promises never fail. For I know your thoughts, your plans for me are good, and I know you hold my future and my hope. Your promises never fail. Your promises never fail. Your promises never fail. Your promises never fail. We sing, God, you are with us, and what can separate us? You are with me, what can separate us? You are for me, what can stand against us? Your love, it won't let go, I know it won't. Darkness, shadows have no power over me. Fear is empty, and shame has no authority. Your love, it won't let go, I know it won't. For I know your thoughts, your plans for me are good, and I know you hold my future and my hope. Your promises never fail. Your promises never fail. Healing and freedom is to speak favor over me. Faith is breaking all impossibility. Your name has overcome. Your name alone. For I know your thoughts, your plans for me are good, and I know you hold my future and my hope. Your promises never fail. Your promises never fail. Your promises never fail. Your promises never fail. So this, God, we stand on the promises you make. I am standing on every promise that you make. I will see it come to pass in your name, in your name. Jesus, I will trust every word I hear you say. I will see it come to pass in your name, in your name. I am standing on future and my hope. Your promises never fail. Your promises never fail. Your promises never fail. Your promises never fail.
Together we sing, you give life. You give life, you are love. You bring light to the darkness. You give hope, you restore every heart. And great are you, Lord. It's your breath. It's your breath in our lungs. So we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs. So we pour out our praise to you only. You give life, you are love. You bring light to the darkness. You give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Oh, great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. Every voice in all the earth, let's give him praise. All the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry. These bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. Holding nothing back. Come on. All the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry. These words will sing. Oh, great are you, Lord. All the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry. These bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your There's nowhere else I'd rather be on a Sunday morning. I don't know about you guys, but lifting up the name of Jesus together in community. It's such a good day. Would you turn around to your neighbor and welcome him to the church?
Well, good morning, everybody. How you guys feeling? Wow. Okay. Let's try this. Good morning, everybody. How we feeling? Oh, wow. Welcome. We're so glad that you are with us. If I've not met you yet, my name is Brandon. I'm the campus pastor here. And what that means is each and every Sunday, I get the opportunity to come out and embrace you, to say a little bit about who we are as a church, what we're about, and where we're going. That's what I get to do, and I love it. And I love that you're on this journey with us. Well, you hear me say this most each and every Sunday, but we are a church that exists to inspire people to know, to love, and to follow Jesus. We're so excited that hopefully this morning you have already experienced some of that inspiration. But we also want to continue to create a culture that's not just about us, but also for other people out there who might not yet be inspired to know, love, or follow Jesus. So I'll tell you a little bit about some opportunities coming up here at church where we can join together and encourage other people. You guys, the first one is simply this. Friday night, right in here, is a middle school dance. Yeah, picture this. 300 middle schoolers jamming out to the classics. Amy Grant, Vanilla Ice. It's gonna be the best place to be if you're in middle school. All right? So we love that as a church, we get to create a culture where kids can be safe, they can have fun, they can be supervised, and just enjoy what we get to experience, community here. So if that's something you're interested in volunteering at, extra treasure in heaven, you can fill that out on the connection card that you received when you first walked in. Also, we want to let you know summer is happening. And when I say summer, I know most of you know what 13 in 13 days is. It's Father's Day, right? Yeah, now you know. Glad you came. Fathers, this is the day we honor and we actually get to do what we want. Actually, we just kind of do what we want each and every day, don't we? Anyways, okay. Here's what we want you to know about Father's Day. We are going to create an amazing atmosphere in the lobby. So we hope that you will partner with us and be thinking about who do you want to bring to church with you on Father's Day. It's going to be a fun Sunday. So we're going to be giving you the opportunity to practice this invitational life and be thinking about who you want to have join you for Father's Day. Again, in 13 days. Get your gifts ready. All right. On your way in, you received one of these. It's our connection and our bulletin. Love for you to read over that. A little bit of information about what we have going on at the church. I've already mentioned the middle school dance, but it's also our connection card. It's our way to kind of get in your life a little bit. If there's prayer requests, if there's a next step in faith that you want to take, you can check that box. And after you filled that out after the service, as you head out through the same doors you came in, you can drop that in the Give and Connect box. That's just, again, our way to stay in contact with you and let us know what's going on in your life. We'll call it the Give and Connect box because it's also a place where you can give. It's one of the three ways that you can give. Here, you can text in gifting, or you can go online to willamette.cc and give online as well. So just want to let you know about that. Also, last thing I want you to know about is if you're newer with us, you've been the last couple weeks, and I haven't had a chance to meet you yet, I would love to meet you right over here in the creepy corner called I'm New Here. Right after the service, I'd love to just hear your story, it'll be more lit at that point in the service. We'll see each other. I'd just love to have a quick conversation with you, meet you, hear a little bit about your story, tell you a little bit about what God's doing here at Willamette, and just get a chance to connect with you. So right after the service, that's I'm New Here. Okay, you guys, we are week 3 into our This Invitational Life. Grant will be out here in just a minute, but first, we have a really powerful story about how important it is to be people who invite people into what God is doing.
The first Christians I ever wanted to be like were these two guys named Dominic and Nathan, but they went by the name Dominic. These two juniors, they played basketball and soccer and baseball. They were just fun, good, incredible guys. And I remember one time we got done playing basketball and Dominic came up to me and he just simply said, "Hey Carter, you wanna learn how to dominate life?" Which to this day I still think was the greatest question anyone has ever asked me. And over the next 2 years, these two took me under their wing. They'd pick me up, take me to shoot hoops, we'd go get burgers, and they'd ask me questions about life. They were teaching me about the way of Jesus and kept telling me about a God who wanted to get closer and closer and closer to me. And it was through them that I got to see and experience what this invitational life was truly all about.
Well, good morning. As Brandon mentioned, my name is Grant, and I am excited to just continue in the series with you. If you call Willamette home, I'm so glad that you are here this weekend as we've just been going on this journey together of what does it look like to live an invitational life. If you're maybe a guest with us this morning, I'm encouraged that you're here. I hope that you've enjoyed the time so far and that this is a place where you can call home maybe eventually. And I would encourage you right after the service to meet Brandon in the I'm New Here corner, which doesn't look as creepy now with the lights on. And so you could just jump in there and maybe just connect and ask questions about who we are, and maybe we can even get to know you a little bit. You know, we've been in this series, The Invitational Life, and I love that story that we just heard from Steve Carter of these two guys, right, that came and they were 11th graders, and he was in 7th grade, and they invited him into their life. And clearly already they had been living a life in such a way that he idolized them. He was looking up to them. I mean, you hear that in his voice. He's like, they did this sport and that sport and this, and they were just awesome, and they came and they gave me this invitation, and I was like, yes. Because really, the invitational life isn't just about giving invites to people. We want you to continually invite people. It's also about living a life that when people look at it, they would go, that's the kind of life I want to live. Because then when you're living that way and you invite someone in, the answer is going to be yes. You know, I can't help but think about role models when I think about that sort of a life. Maybe you grew up with a role model of some sort in your life. Maybe it was an athlete. You grew up with an athlete that you knew you were going to emulate this athlete and go and practice as much as they did and work as hard. Or maybe it was a musician that when you saw them play, something, it just woke up inside of you. And so you went and bought your first guitar and you sat down to play. Maybe it was an artist and you just saw their work and it moved you in a way that inspired you to do something. Maybe it was Benny in the sandlot with his PF Flyers and you thought, if I could get those, I will jump faster and run further and I can destroy the beast, right? It's summer. What a great summer movie, right? Like, I don't know what it was, but the thing about all of those is that they're sort of fictional. Even if they're real athletes or musicians or artists, you're not in relationship with them. You don't actually know them, which is where I think role models come in. That if you could think back to being a younger kid and you would look up to people that were ahead of you in life and you would look at them and say, man, one of these days I want to be like them. There's somebody that I would love, and you knew them. Or at least you wanted to get to know them. I can think of a few individuals in my life that were this way. One of them is my big brother. And I could talk on and on and on about my big brother, but I want to tell you about his friends. See, my brother had a group of friends, but there was 3 of them in particular. There's 3 of them that were his guys. They were in each other's weddings. They ran around together that I looked at them and I said, man, I would love to be like them someday. These friends' names were Brad and Jeffrey and Jonathan. They called themselves Dominate. I'm just kidding. They didn't do that because that wouldn't make sense. But they were just these great guys that called themselves Brad and Jeffrey and Jonathan. And they poured into me, and they viewed me not simply as the little brother, let me quantify that, the annoying little brother of their friend. What they did is they saw me as someone that they could pour into and that they could care for, and that they would invite me in to hang out with them at different occasions. And these 3 guys couldn't have been more different. You see, Jeffrey, he was brilliant. He was the smartest kid in his class. I mean, he at graduation was the valedictorian. Did I say that right? Every single time I can't even say the word. He is the word, right? He's just this brilliant individual. And not only that, but he was involved in drama, and I was involved in theater in high school. And so I looked up to him, and I thought, man, this guy's so brilliant in the way that he puts characters together and the way that he portrays things. And then there was Brad. Brad was very different from Jeffrey. Brad played tennis, and I played tennis in junior high and high school, and so I looked up to him on the tennis team as these guys were all seniors when I was a freshman, and I was going, man, Brad, I'd love to be like that. Not only is he really good at tennis, but man, he walks into a room, and everybody in the room turns and looks at him. He's the life of the party. Like, everybody loves Brad. You want to be Brad's friend when he comes. You want to invite him to hang out with you, and like, man, I would love that kind of popularity. And then there was Jonathan. And Jonathan, he wasn't this great actor and brilliant individual, and he wasn't the most popular guy at the party, but man, Jonathan, he had a great sense of humor. And Jonathan was the guy that in any given moment, he just could say that one thing that the entire room laughed at. And I don't consider myself a funny individual, and so I would look at Jonathan and be like, man, how can I learn from him in that way? Not only that, Jonathan had this uncanny ability that he could meet you and you could say, yeah, my grandmother's in the hospital. She's going in for surgery or whatever the story was. And 2 weeks later, when he ran into you again, he would come up to you and say, hey, how's your grandmother? How did the surgery go? But he didn't call her grandma. He called her by the grandmother name that she went by, because he had heard the story and he cared about people enough to remember that and relate to them in that way. And I remember looking at these three people and saying, man, I would love to be like them, because that's what a role model does. But then somewhere along the way, we all grew up and we quit living our lives in a way that other people that are coming after us, that are in relationship around us, would look at us and say, that person has something that I want. And so how do I get invited into their life? I don't know what caused us to grow up and quit living our lives in a way that other people are watching, where we could say, how can I be a role model for others? How do I live an invitational life that people want to be a part of? I think there's different reasons for this breakdown, but one of them, it's what social analysts call relational poverty. It's a new phenomenon that they've been studying and looking at in our culture, and they say there's kind of four things that has broken down relationships, these connections that we have with one another, where we feel like we understand and can relate and can speak into each other's lives. And one of the things that's broken down relationships that we have is the breakdown of families. And the fact that when the family units started to fall apart and to disintegrate at ever-increasing paces, that we lost relationships. And some of you have lived this. You know this, and the reason for it is because you've got a gym that you go to as a couple, and then the divorce happens, and now who goes to the gym? And there's people there that you're in relationship with that one of you isn't going to be anymore. Or you're in your neighborhood, and you've lived there for some time, and you've gotten to know your neighbors around you, but then the divorce happens, and now one of you has to move, or you sell the house, and you both move, and you lose the relationships that are there. Or maybe for some of you, it was even a church. That you were going to a church together and you were involved, and for whatever reason, your relationship fell apart and you divorced, and now you're going, I feel like I have to choose a new church. Like, how does that even work? And you have to start over in building relationships. The second thing that's contributed to this is increased mobility. The fact that now, in a lot of ways, it's easier to fly somewhere than it is to drive means that we can travel longer distances. And with the invent of, the 5G network, you've been seeing that pop up on your phone lately. You're like, what is that, right? With the invention of networks where you can connect with people in FaceTime, like, we don't have to be in proximity to be in relationship. I've lived this out. My wife and I moved here almost 3 years ago now, and I came from Texas, and she came from Maui, right? And we moved here where we don't have family legacy anymore. And we don't have the friendships that we bonded with. The home community that we were in back in Texas, it was made up of a bunch of people, but a few of those individuals, 2 of them had been my best friends since 2nd grade. That's the sort of relational capital that I have with them. But because I moved, I got pulled over by a state trooper one time when I was in high school running late to work. And the state trooper, I handed him my driver's license. He looked at it and he goes, oh, you're Jay Pat's boy. And I was like, yes, sir, I am. Is that a good thing? Right? And he was like, yeah, absolutely. He said, get to work. Slow down, though. And it got me out of a ticket because there was deep roots in relationship. And with increased mobility, we've lost some of that. But it's not just simply that. Now we have heavy workloads. It's not uncommon for people to say now that, yeah, I'm working 60, 70, 80 hours a week. The 40-hour work week seems to be a thing of the past that we need to actually fight to get back, I would say. But now we're working so hard for the next deadline and the next account and the next thing that we all say, I'm crazy busy, and we no longer have the margin to relate to people on any sort of capacity, because as soon as we get off work, what we want to do is just unplug and go do our own thing rather than meet with new people and engage with them and pour into them. Because we're all crazy busy. And then there's this beautiful, ugly beast that is social media. This thing that in some ways helps us to connect with people that we never would be able to connect with, and that I can stay in relationship and know what's happening in the lives of friends that I'm no longer in proximity with. But then there's the other side of it where I just see that something good's going on in your life and it's not going good in my life, and now I become jealous of you. And so the next time I see you in person, I carry with me that private jealousy that I have that you don't even know about, and it's a barrier between our relationship. Or maybe it's that there's something that happens and I see a post that you like, or that you put something on Facebook and I see that and I just completely disagree with you. And now when I see you, I can't help but think about that narrative in my head. And it may be something that I wouldn't even be judging you on if I was in relationship with you. Because you see, in relationship, I can have dialogue with you. We can have a conversation about it. I can understand your perspective and where you're coming from. When you're not in relationship and it's all just through social media, what ends up happening is I just simply judge you based on an opinion that you have. And this has led to a breakdown in relationships. So if we're going to live the invitational life and connect to people and relate to them, how do we begin to gain that back? Well, thankfully, we have a man named Jesus to model our lives after. That we can read scriptures and look at Jesus and say, man, Jesus had this uncanny ability to relate to people across all boundaries and lines. He could go to the rich and the poor, the weak and the strong, the male and the female, those that were of his same ethnicity and those that were different. And he had this unique ability to relate to them right where they were at. And so I want us to look this morning at a couple of stories of Jesus found in Matthew chapter 8. If you've got your Bibles, you can go ahead and begin to open them up there. If not, for whatever reason, download YouVersion app real quick, or the words will be behind me on the screen here. But see, in Matthew 8, I want to sort of catch you up to what's been happening. Matthew, it's written by a guy the book carries his name. And Matthew, he was a tax collector. Now, what you need to understand about tax collectors is they were not well liked in their culture and society, much unlike today. Right? They were these guys that what happened was Rome came and they ruled over the Jewish nation. And when they began to do that, they began to tax them. And so certain individuals that were Jewish, they would say, hey, I want to be on the right side of history here. So they would align themselves with the Roman government and become tax collectors and begin to tax their countrymen above and beyond what they were supposed to in order to get rich off of it. To the point that Scripture, when it talks about people, it would often say there were two groups of people. There were sinners and there were tax collectors. Like they have their own negative category because they were so ostracized in their society. And yet Jesus comes to a tax collector named Matthew, and he encourages Matthew to follow him, and Matthew leaves all of that behind and he follows Jesus. To the point that he writes the Gospel of Matthew. This firsthand account of watching what Jesus did. And Matthew, being a tax collector, he's very detail-oriented. And he covers Jesus' life. And the first 5, 6, 7 chapters, what we're going to see is if you had time to go read it this week. It's a beautiful thing where Jesus gets up on a mountain and he gives what's called the Sermon on the Mount. And it's this eloquent, beautiful sermon where he encourages people in their faith and calls them forward out of what they once believed and into new life. And Matthew records that because throughout his entire gospel, he's writing to an audience of Jewish individuals. That he's saying, if you don't yet follow Jesus, I want you to understand that Jesus was the one we were waiting for, the Savior of the world. He can give you a life that you can't get outside of him. And if you're already following Jesus, then I want to encourage you just to continue to do that you have this beautiful gift that's been given. You see, Matthew writes an entire book that's basically the invitational life. Let me show you who Jesus is. Let me show you how to live that way so that people would be invited into it. And after this Sermon on the Mount, we're going to pick up in Matthew 8. Jesus has just finished this amazing sermon, and he comes down off of the mountain. And here's what Matthew tells us. After he came down from the mountain, large crowds followed him. And a leper approached and bowed low before him, saying, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. I want to stop right there for just a moment. Go back to verse 1 and 2. You see there's this thing that happens where Jesus comes down off of the mountain. And I don't know about you. No, actually I do. I know about you because you're like me. There's this moment, if you've had a really good work day, maybe you closed a bunch of sales, or maybe it was something where you had this deadline and you finally hit it, and it's just been great. You've had this mountaintop of a work day. You got the promotion, you got the raise. It's just been amazing. You knocked it out of the park, and you get off work, and you can't wait to go celebrate with your coworkers. You can't wait to go home and have the celebration and just to talk about how you deserved that good day and all the hard work that you put in, or maybe it was a good day, but you're exhausted, and you can't wait to go home and sit down and play with the kids just long enough to get to 7:30, which is really hard right now with the light up a little bit later, and to put them into bed and be like, stay there because mom and I are going to go watch Netflix. Just me? Okay. Right? Like this is what you want to do because it's all about you. But Jesus comes off the mountain and somebody approaches him. And Jesus has time for him. And this leper comes to Jesus and says, if you are willing, I know that you can make me clean. Notice in his question, he's not assuming that Jesus will. The leper has seen Jesus' life. The reputation of Jesus has preceded him. And the leper's going, Jesus, you're living some sort of a life that I want to be a part of. I know that you have something that I can't get anywhere else. And so, Jesus, would you please, if you're willing, would you be able, can I come into your life? Jesus is living an invitational life. And here the leper, something we need to understand about lepers is that lepers were the outcasts in society. They were the ones that were on the fringes of it. What would happen is, in the day and age of the medical world that they lived in, you would get some sort of maybe an abrasion on your skin or some sort of a rash or a disease that would happen. And because they couldn't identify what it was, they would put it in this catch-all category called leprosy. Not too much unlike cancer today. That if you were to come up to me and say, hey, I have cancer, my immediate question would be, which kind? And where's it at? Because we know that there's over 100 different types of cancer, and some of them are extremely serious, and some of them aren't as serious. And so I want to know which kind of cancer, where are we on the spectrum? It's a catch-all word for any time the body attacks the cells and begins to destroy itself. And so that was leprosy in their day and age. It was a catch-all disease. But if you were labeled as having leprosy, what you had to do was immediately leave that society and go to a leper colony, where your immune system is already weak, you're already down, you already have maybe some skin abrasions, and now you're susceptible to other diseases that are all there in the cesspool of this colony. To the point that if you really did catch onset leprosy, you would begin to lose all feeling, and so you couldn't feel when something was warm or cold, and you would end up accidentally burning your leg in the fire, and your face would deform, and now you look funky, and so nobody wants you to come back into society. This is the individual after Jesus has been up on the mountain that comes to him. And he says, Jesus, if you're willing, would you give me back my place in our society and culture? Would you heal me of this? Because most likely this individual had some family and some friends that they had not seen in a long time. And I love Jesus' response. It says that he stretched out. He stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, I am willing, be clean. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. Jesus looks at this leper, and he doesn't see him as a leper. He sees him as a person, and we know that because he reaches out and touches him. You wouldn't do that to a leper. You don't touch a leper. If you touch a leper, you might catch leprosy. You might catch what they have, and now you've got to go to the leper colony and be on the outside and lose your family and friends. Not only that, but you're going to be made ceremonially unclean, which means you can't go to the temple to worship God. And as a good Jewish man, that would have been something that Jesus did on a regular basis. But Jesus was willing to say, no, I'm going to relate to you in a way that is going to cost me something. I'm going to sacrificially come to you, sacrifice my own standing in this society, and I'm going to come and I'm going to reach out and I'm going to touch you. It's probably the first time that the leper had been touched that way in a long time. That someone was willing to say, I don't see you for what's on the outside. I don't judge you for the disease that you have. You're a human being made in the image of God. And so Jesus touches him and then heals him. And immediately the leper was cleansed. The story goes on in the next verse that Jesus would tell the individual, hey, go to the temple and let them know so that they can see the power of God, but don't tell anybody who did this until you get there. And as often happens, the leper just starts telling everybody who it was that did it. And then Matthew just moves on from that story. And in verse 5, here's the very next story. When he, being Jesus, entered Capernaum, which would have been nearby the mountain, so Jesus is in the same region, a centurion came to him asking for help. And so here, I love that Matthew just continues right on, and he goes, okay, now Jesus is in this metropolitan city of Capernaum, and there's a centurion, and the centurion comes to ask for help. Now, a centurion, they would have been an elite in the Roman army. This centurion, they would have been holding a position which was the highest non-commissioned office, which means the person wasn't given the rank of centurion because they had done something great and then been appointed to it. What it meant is they had started at the bottom, now they're here. They had worked their way up through the ranks in order to be centurion. And as a centurion, this individual would have been commander over somewhere around 100 men. Centurion, it's an easy way to remember it. And so he would have been a commander over all these individuals, and here this person comes. So don't miss this. We've had, so far in Matthew's gospel, an outcast, a sick leper that comes to Jesus and says, if you're willing, heal me. And Jesus relates to him and does it. And now Jesus' life is lived in such a way that that an elite Roman guard is coming to him and saying, Jesus, I need help. Jesus is able to span the perspectives of society. And here's what the guy comes asking help for in the next verse. Lord, my servant is lying at home paralyzed in terrible anguish. And Jesus said, well, then I will come and heal him. But the centurion replied, Lord, I'm not worthy to have you come under my roof. Instead, just say the word and my servant will be healed. For I too am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. And so I say to this one, go, and he says, go, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my slave, do this, and he does it. And when Jesus heard this, he was amazed and said to those who followed him, I tell you the truth. I have not found such faith in anyone in Israel. You see, this Roman centurion comes to Jesus and he says, my servant in my household is sick and I need you to heal him. Jesus is like, okay, let's go. Let's go. If that's the need, then come on, I'll come and I'll come to your house and I'll heal him. And the centurion goes, no. Jesus, you don't understand. I don't need you to come to my house. Jesus, I've got men under my control. I have a household that answers to me. When I say jump, they say how high. I know how authority works. And the centurion recognized Jesus' authority. And he said, Jesus, would you exercise that authority on my behalf? This would have been treasonous. Because what this Roman centurion is admitting is that there is a higher authority than Rome. But Jesus is living such a life that this centurion says, I want to be a part of that. And so, Jesus, I don't need you to come. I just need you to heal the individual. Just say it and it will happen. And Jesus turns to his disciples and he gives them a little, hey, here's what's going on, and this is beautiful, and this guy has more faith than anyone in Israel. And then in verse 13, Jesus says to the centurion, so go. And just as you believed it, it will be done for you. And the servant was healed in that hour. In that moment, Jesus shifted what he was doing. He said, oh, this guy has a different need. He doesn't need me to touch him. He doesn't need me to come and to hold that servant and to give you love. He goes, no, this guy recognizes my authority, so I can just relate to him through authority and say, fine, your servant is healed. And by the time the centurion gets home, he sees that the servant is healed. Jesus relates to him in a unique and a different way because Jesus knew how to relate to different people in different ways. And then Matthew just moves on from that story. Verse 14, here's what he says. Now when Jesus entered Peter's house, he saw Peter's mother, his mother-in-law, lying down, sick with a fever. So Jesus touched her hand, and the fever left her. Then she got up and began to serve them again. And so here, what happens is they're in Capernaum, and they've decided to make that be their base and their headquarters for the ministry that they're going to do in that city. And they go to this house, and here it's Peter's home, but his mother-in-law is sick. And man, I don't know if you have the gift of hospitality, but if you know someone that is willing to open their home, and listen, if you're going to open your home to a bunch of ragamuffin dudes that used to be fishermen to come into your house and to make it their headquarters of ministry, you better have the gift of hospitality. Right? Like that's Peter's mother-in-law. She's opened her home in this way, but if you have been given that gift, you've been given the gift of hospitality, and now you get a fever where you're sick to the point that you don't know if you're going to recover, and even if you do recover, you're going to have the flu aches for a few days and not really be yourself. It's killing you because you've invited people into your home, and you can't do the one thing you want to do. Instead of you being able to serve them, they're serving you. And Jesus recognizes that. And so he comes to this, a Jewish friend, and he sits down beside her and he grabs her hand. That's a different kind of intimate relationship. You know, as a pastor, I've had the ability and the privilege of doing hospital visits. And in hospital visits, there's some of the most amazing and heart-wrenching things you can do. You're never really prepared for what you're going to walk in on. You don't know the conversations that are being had, and so you're there to just hear the stories and to relate to the family and to have a conversation and to pray with them. And you know, in that moment when the person is sitting in the bed and they've got a surgery that's coming that they don't know if they're going to come out of it, I've been able to sit at the bedside of people and just reach out and grab their hand. Say, hey, can I just pray for you real quick? I just want to take this moment, and I can tell you the beautiful power in just holding someone's hand when they are sick. And that's what Jesus does. He relates to her in a completely different way, and he says, you're healed. And not only does he heal her of whatever fever she has and the ailment that is, he heals her to the point that she doesn't have the flu. She gets up and gets to step right into the role of hospitality and preparing the place exactly how he needs to. And then Matthew just sort of does this in the next verse. He goes, and so when it was evening, many demon-possessed people were brought to him. He drove out the spirits with a word and healed all who were sick. I think this is Matthew's way of saying, and I could tell you more. I could go on and on and on about story after story after story, even just in Capernaum where Jesus came and he was there, and the demon-possessed and the sick and the hurting and the needy of all sorts of society came. And Jesus was able to relate to them exactly how they needed him to relate. You see, Jesus had this amazing ability to step into people's life and to care for them. And so the question for us is if you're a follower of Jesus, then you're called to be more like Jesus. You're called to emulate your life after him. And that means that I need to be asking myself, am I living the kind of life that when people look at me, they say, there's something going on there, and I want to be invited into that. I want to know what's going on and how do I be a part of that, and what are the sectors of society that I can go to. And as soon as I start to feel that calling on my life and say, yeah, I want to go relate to all sorts of people, whether it's the outcast that is sick, that nobody wants anything to do with them, or whether it's the Roman government military official, or whether it's someone's mother-in-law. I want to be able to look at those people and say, yeah, I can relate in some way to them. And I feel this calling, and then immediately I begin to play this voice in my head that goes, yeah, you can't do that. Like, you're not good. Like, you don't know how to relate to people in that way. You don't have enough life experience. You can't relate to all these people in all these different ways. And as soon as I start playing that in my head, the Holy Spirit goes, yeah, you're right. You can't. You're not supposed to. You're supposed to relate just to the people that I've brought into your life, the people that are around you. Don't get overwhelmed by trying to relate to everybody. Just look at the people that I've brought you. The people that you already sit next to at work, the people that you are around in your neighborhood, the parents of the kids on your t-ball team. Like go and just relate to them. Those are the people that I've brought into your life, so just focus on them. Don't get overwhelmed by all the different people. Go focus on them. You're uniquely gifted. You have the ability to relate to someone in a way that nobody else can. So go relate to them. And all of a sudden, it doesn't seem as daunting to me anymore. And so I go, okay, Jesus, then how do I begin to do that? How do I begin to live that life? And I think the first thing that we have to do is suspend judgment. We have to be willing to step back and quit judging people. And I know how hard that is because I do it all the time. I look at people and I go, well, based on the way that they're dressed, I'm going to assume this thing about them. And then based on their hair style, I'm going to guess this about them. And, oh, they just said that thing, and that seems to be a buzzword for this. And so clearly they think this way, which means we're going to disagree about this. And I just begin to judge you and to step back and say, hey, because of that, I can't have a relationship with you. Jesus didn't do that. He goes, I don't see you as a leper. I see you as a human being. I don't see you as a military official. I see you as a human being. I don't see you as someone's mother-in-law. I see you as a human being. And all of you are in need of the powerful work of me in your life. Jesus could suspend judgment on them and come and love them well and care for them right where they were at. You know who else does this besides Jesus in a really positive way? Is kids. Kids are great at this. Like if I go to the playground right now, there's this time of year, right? There's a playground near our house. And so we get on our bikes and we walk and ride over there. And the kids go and they start running around the play set. And immediately what I do is I go and I stand nearby so I can watch them. And I'm kind of standing around. And then all of a sudden I see a dad over there and I'm like, look at him. Like that dude's just on his cell phone the whole time. His kid just fell off the monkey bars and is crying and he doesn't even know it yet. Like what a deadbeat dad. And then I look over here and I'm like, well, look at her. Like Miss Helicopter Mom, she won't even let her kid fall off the monkey bars and get hurt. Like how's she raising her kid? And then I look at somebody else and I'm like, look at him. Like his dad bod's looking better than my dad bod. Like I don't know what I need to do with that, right? And I'm sitting there sizing everybody up at the playground. Meanwhile, my kids and the other kids, they're all running around playing with each other. They've invited them into whatever silly game they've made up that only they know the rules to, right? And they're playing it and they're running around because kids are willing to say, hey, you're a kid. Come be a kid with me. Meanwhile, all of us as adults, we've grown up and become cynical and we just stand around judging one another and we're missing out on relationship. You see, Jesus was able to step in and say, hey, I'm not going to judge you. I'm going to actually suspend that and get to know you. I'm going to relate to you and I bet eventually we're going to find common ground and something that we can connect over. And so we have to suspend judgment. But then as we do that and begin to invite people into our life or be invited into theirs, then we need to relate with our time. See, I would argue that time is our most valuable commodity. That time is the thing that we waste the most of, but try to cling on to at all costs. And when we walk in this paradox of a situation, and instead we look at our finances and go, well, man, money, I can lose money, and I got to fight for more money. And it's like, right, but if you lose it, you can regain it, you can find it, you can get more of it. If you lose your time, you can't find it. Once time is spent, it is over. Time can't be recycled. It is a valuable commodity, and yet if I was to take a time audit of my life, I wonder how much time I'm wasting. And then I'm just spending it like I've got all of it in the world, and I don't value it for what it is worth. See, one of the best ways to relate to someone is to invite them into your life and to give them time. To sit down with them and to have the conversation. That's what Dom and Nate did, right? Dominic and Nate, that's what they did with him is they said, hey, we're going to invite you in. You want to play ball? We're going to go get burgers. And it was time after time after time. It was doing it over and over again rather than just one time. What if we began to look at our time this way and we said, I'm going to live the invitational life, which means I need to get to know people, and so I'm going to invest my time in kingdom purposes, which are God's people. And I'm going to go and pour into them. And so, yeah, let's take the time on it and figure out what are the things that I can begin to say no to in order to be able to say yes to opportunities and relationships. And then as we do that, we relate by listening. We relate by listening to each other. Like you see each one of these in Jesus. He comes off the mountain and he goes and the leper comes and he gives him his time and then he listens to him and he hears his need and he can see it and he touches it. And there's this moment with the centurion. There's this moment where the centurion, Jesus is saying, hey, I want to come to your house and I'll heal it. And the centurion goes, I don't need you to do that. Like, no, I don't need you to do that. And Jesus changes what he was going to do because he was actually listening to the need in the moment rather than being stuck on what he thought needed to happen. See, so many of us, when we're listening to people, we listen in order to reply, not to understand. Or we listen to them in a way where then we get to respond so that we sound interesting rather than respond in a way that they know we're interested. And so we have to be willing to step back and really listen to people, to ask questions of their life, to care, to do what Jonathan did and remember their names and get to know them and pour into them. You only do that by listening. By slowing down enough to care about them. If you want practice on how to listen, I would encourage you to do this. Do it with your spouse. Do it with a friend. Sit down and say, hey, let's just have a conversation with one another. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to tell me what's going on in your life. And then after you tell me what's happening, I'm going to repeat back to you what you just said. This is a practice in active listening. And so I'm just going to repeat back to you what I just heard you say. And sometimes you're going to repeat it back to them and they're going to go, yeah, you summarized that well. And other times you're going to repeat it back to them and they're like, were you even listening? Like, it's not at all what I said. But it's just a way that we all can learn because we're not good at this naturally. And so we need to relate by listening. And then you relate uniquely. You relate to the person in a way that they need you to relate to them because you've taken time to care for them and to get to know them. This is where the art of the invitational life comes in. That you know what they have. And again, we see this with Jesus where he touches the leper because that's what he needed. The centurion needed him to just exercise his authority, and the mother-in-law needed him to simply hold her hand. Jesus understood the unique circumstances and how each one of them needed something differently. And here's what I would tell you is that you are wired in a unique and an amazing and in a specific way that you get to relate to people in a way that I never could. Because God has placed something in you that you need to step into and begin to live out of and say, God, you have gifted me in ways to pour into people's lives and to relate to them in a way that nobody else can. And so now you begin to look around your neighborhood and that house beside you comes up for sale and you no longer start praying, God, I ask that you would bring in a Christian family to live there so that our kids can both follow Jesus. You go, no, God, I want you to bring in next door to me someone that doesn't know you because you've placed me in this neighborhood for this specific time and place, and maybe I'm the conduit that brings them to Jesus because we relate because we both live in this neighborhood. And you begin to live your life in a different way and say, I am uniquely positioned to do this. Or maybe it's not you. Maybe you know the person uniquely positioned. Remember some years ago now, I was at a restaurant. And the server came and he was doing a great job. And I noticed that he had a couple of different tattoos here and there. And I love tattoos and the stories that are behind them. And so I noticed on his arm right here, he had one that clearly had some Hebrew writing. And it was a beautiful full color piece that had different motifs that I was like, those are clearly biblical motifs. And so I just towards the end of the dinner, as I was writing the check and making sure to tip him really, really well, I said, hey, just out of curiosity, what's going on with your tattoo? What's the story there? And he goes, oh man, this thing. He goes, it's the first tattoo I ever got. He says, I grew up in a Christian home and I was following Jesus. And so I went and got this when I was in college. But man, since then, I've just evolved and I've become much more enlightened. And I don't believe in that anymore. And I've just read these other books and I realized that it's all just a bunch of junk. And so I don't believe it anymore. But man, it's sort of an homage to who I used to be. And I went, wow. I said, man, thank you for sharing that with me. There's a story there, though. There's a story behind the journey that you just told me of why you got it and why you know. And I said, I don't want to be weird, but man, I would love to hear that story sometime. That intrigues me because there's some depth to you that I want to understand. And I said, for what it's worth, I've got some tattoos and I'll tell you the stories behind mine. We can just swap stories. And so I said, what's your evening look like? What's this week? And he said, well, how about tomorrow night? Let's go grab beers. There's this place over here that I go to. I said, sounds good. And I said, hey, if it's not too much, I'd love to bring a friend of mine. I said, I'd love to bring a friend, not because we're trying to gang up on you or anything, but because I think that my friend can relate to you in a way that I never could. And he was like, yeah, dude, I don't care, whatever, as long as you're buying. I was like, deal. I said, deal. Absolutely. And so I grabbed a friend of mine named Brady, and we went and we sat down with this guy, and we began to have conversation, and sure enough, the two of them connected in just the way that I thought that they were, and within a matter of 10 minutes, I didn't even need to be there. I was like I wasn't there. The two of them were having this conversation because in that moment, they could relate uniquely to individuals in a way that I couldn't. You see, I believe that you're in community and you have people in and around your life that if you're building relationship with them, and you're getting to know all of their stories and you're living this invitational life, you'll get to know someone, and as you relate uniquely to them, they're going to say something, and you're going to go, ooh, have you met my friend? And now you get to bring them in, and the circle increases as we do this life together. And so as we live invitationally, maybe for you, you need to say, okay, God, who are you calling me to relate to? Who are you calling me? And if you haven't already begun to write those names down, write them down and pray for them. Pray for those names. Look at the people around you and say, God, you've called me to them. And this is the unique perspective and position you've given me. So, okay, I'm going to begin to pray for them. And then you go, okay, God, I need to know how to uniquely relate to them because I don't know their need. And so, Spirit, I'm going to need you to give me some sort of an insight here that I can't explain on my own of a way to relate to them. And let's just see God show up in that moment. And then you begin to look at your time and you say, what do I need to say no to now so that I can say yes to people later? So that you can then look at them, and when you can have something going on, you can invite them into it, or maybe better yet, when you live in such a way that they invite you to hang out with them, you've created the margin to be able to say yes. Let's pray together. Father, we just come before you. And I thank you for the Gospel of Matthew, for this outcast tax collector that said yes to your invitation. And then he gave us these beautiful words that we can see your life and how you lived. God, would you help each of us in this room, those watching online, God, to just begin to press into this invitational life. Spirit, you would show us unique ways where we can relate to people because you're a God of relationships. It's in the name of Jesus that we pray these things. Amen. I'm going to continue to worship now through a time of communion. This is something we do every single week here because we want to remember what Jesus has done for us. And so as the servers come, they're going to pass some trays, and on those trays you're going to find a piece of bread that represents Jesus' body that was broken for you. You're going to find a cup of juice that is representative of the blood that was shed. And that Jesus did not consider equality with God something to hold on to, but humbled himself, becoming man to the point of death on a cross, that he related to us in every way possible. And so we encourage you, if you follow Jesus, take communion with us this morning at any time while the music is playing. If you're not yet a follower of Jesus, this is a fantastic time to just sit and to think about a little bit what God is stirring in you and why you're here and the unique relationships that he has around you and maybe the people you know that are living that invitational life that you need to call and say, hey, I'd love to take you out sometime and hear more about the story that God is working in your life. Let's all take communion together now.
Spoke a word, you were singing over me. You've been so good to me. Before I took a breath, you breathed your life in me. You've been so kind to me. And oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves at 99. I couldn't earn, I don't deserve, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God, yeah. When I was your foe, still your love fought for me. You've been so good to me. When I felt no worth, you paid it all for me. You've been so kind to me. And oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves at 99. I couldn't earn, I don't deserve, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God, yeah. There's no shadow you won't light up, a mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, a lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, a mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, a lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, a lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, a lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves at 99. And I couldn't earn it, and I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God,
Thank you for joining us this morning. I just trust and hope and pray that this week, God would put people in your lives and in your path and around you. And maybe even now you already know the name of how you need to love them and care for them and relate to them in ways that seem reckless and that don't make sense to anyone else, but they make sense to you because you're following God's calling. If you're new with us this morning, as Brandon mentioned, we've got I'm New Here right over here to your left, where we would love to meet you and answer any questions you have and get to know some of your story. If for any reason you want prayer this morning, we've got another group of individuals over here that would love to pray with you and just to encourage you this morning. The reason we do prayer is never to embarrass, it's always to encourage. And so if you need encouragement this morning, head over there and get some prayer. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you next week.